Okay, we're live. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly live streams by Không Nói Không Biết. My name is Tran and I will be your host this evening. We have two other hosts right here with us, which is Hui Tran and Duke. Hui, would you like to reintroduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Hui Tran. I am actually an attorney based in San Jose, California, and here just to share some thoughts about what we saw into the Texas storms last week. I'll hand over to Duke.
Hi, everyone. It's Duke again, just here to join in on the conversation with Juan and Hui tonight.
So this week, we're talking about the big news topic that happened last week, which is the Texas crisis regarding the snow that happens seems to be like out of nowhere, as well as the electricity being cut, as well as the water being cut. And before we get to all of that, I just want to expand my scientific background a little bit by talking about why this happened. So usually Texas is located almost near the equator, which is surrounded by a not too cold of air. And it gets direct light from the sun. But once climate change starts by the increase of CO2 in the atmosphere, it warms up the environment and allows for an ozone layer opening here, which cause very wavy polar vortexes. Because usually you're supposed to have a more circular polar vortex, but the increase in the climate change due to the increase in carbon dioxide production causes very wavy vortex, and thereby leads to a surge downwards in terms of the jet streams, and thereby you can see that it forms the kind of dips that in this case caused the huge massive snowstorm in Texas, which I am originally from Texas, and we don't usually get snowstorms. So at the beginning it seems like, wow, this looks like a beautiful winterland, but once more time got on, things start to get more serious. So let's talk about it this week in our weekly live stream. So the first topic is why did this happen? Why did the Texas electrical grid did not work for the snow storm that Texas experienced, and why did it shut down? So I'll hand it out to Hui. Do you want to give some insight on that?
Sure. So, let's take a step back and to define some terms here first, right? Like, let's talk about grid, right? Grid is an infrastructure term. If you just think about how power is generated and how it gets out, what we're really talking about is power gets generated at a plant, and then it has to reach people's homes, offices, like centers where people use the electricity, right? So we're talking about power lines, we're talking about cables, right? We're talking about the kind of system that conveys power, energy from the plant where it's generated into where it's used. So the grid is all those connections. It's that network that brings all that electricity out to the rest of us. So maintaining the grid is actually very, very important because if you see blackouts, or if you see, like one particular area losing power, it's because that section of the grid has either been disconnected, turned off, or there's an issue there that prevents power from getting to those places, right? So what we're seeing right now in Texas is that, like, just huge swaths of Texas were lost power, and on a related note, lost access to water, right? And that just becomes incredibly critical. There's a lot of historical backdrop on this. For a long time, Texas has really carried its infrastructure, or just its economy, under this idea of deregulation, right? Let the market handle everything. What we've seen is that Texas has built its own grid, really independent from what's happening in the rest of the country. It runs its own grid, it runs its own plant generation, and produces power from there. Now, so the interesting thing is, of course, is Texas is independent, right? They can do what they want. In this scenario, there's no federal oversight in that the federal government can't say you have to do X, Y, Z to ensure that your grid can handle crazy systems like what we just saw. And this becomes this can produce the catastrophic results as what we're seeing right now, right? Basically, Texas system wasn't designed to handle this kind of crazy dramatic drop in temperature, despite being warned repeatedly that their systems were not designed for this kind of temperature freeze. And now we see a lot of blackouts. We've seen people's homes be damaged just in terms of extreme reactions to the weather.
All right. So I'm going to add on to what you just said there, Hui. We've expected this to happen. It's happened before. It happened once in 1989. It happened most recently in 2011 when the FERC, which is the Federal Electricity Regulatory Commission, came in and said, look, this will happen. It'll happen again. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it creates a lot of damage. It creates a lot of economic damage. It creates a lot of social damage, and people will die. And as we've seen, all of that has happened this last week. And of course, Texas, instead of listening to the FERC's recommendations, decided to basically, they issued their own recommendations out instead of issuing regulations. Now, FERC, as you've mentioned, now, because Texas runs its own grid, its grid is not connected to either the Western interconnect or the Eastern interconnect. The federal government does not have any regulatory control over Texas's grid, and so the federal government cannot issue regulations. It cannot issue orders to ERCOT, which is kind of the Texan equivalent of FERC. It cannot issue orders to ERCOT to make those regulations. It cannot tell the state government of Texas to make its recommended changes. It can only make recommendations, and then of course the government of Texas and ERCOT of Texas refuse to enact those recommendations into real policy. They just issued just recommendations to the private companies that run these the production of power as well as the distribution of power. And the two chief recommendations I do want to gloss over. Number one is winterizing of the power generating equipment and the fuel delivery infrastructure. And then number two is energy reserve capacity, neither of which was enacted again by ERCOT or by the state government of Texas.
Yeah, Duke and Hui, those are both really good points. And I just wanted to add that it really comes down into Texas being able to separate itself from the federal government and wanting to kind of be in its own bubble, per se. This is obviously purely opinion, but I really think personally, this makes Texas very unprepared for extreme weathers like we have experienced this past week. And so those are really good points to bring up, that we have to winterize our energy sources. We have to make sure that something like this won't happen again. And I believe that a lot of the people, a lot of the government, the Texas governor also put a lot of blame onto the renewable energy regarding this situation. Does anyone want to comment on that? I'll let Duke go first.
Okay. Well, what we've seen is on Tuesday of last week, which I'm just gonna take a look at the date here. On the 16th, Governor Abbott had he went on a radio show and spoke about the real issue, which is that gas pipelines are freezing up, and gas production is the production sites are freezing up. They can't get the gas to be delivered to the energy manufacturing sector. Wednesday, he then goes on to Fox News. I believe it was with either Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson, and then just spewed that lie that this is about green energy. Now, of course, the windmills did freeze. He's not incorrect in saying that the windmills froze. But of course, then the Twitterverse, the social media, we've seen people just post pictures after pictures of windmills in Canada, windmills in Antarctica, in Norway. The issue isn't so much that the issue wasn't that the issue the cause of the issue wasn't that the windmills froze or that the pipelines froze. It's that they weren't winterized. They weren't prepared because, again, plenty of other countries, plenty of other states in this country have those same windmills and pipelines. They don't freeze because they've been winterized, again, because FERC has enacted those regulations for those producers.
Right. It was actually kind of interesting here because, you hear people trying to blame green energy or the Green New Deal, right? The funny thing is the Green New Deal doesn't exist, right? I mean,
exactly.
Right. So we can't blame something that doesn't exist to be the problems that was created here, right? And I see Callie No dropping a comment here. I mean, look, 10% of Texas's power comes from like renewables on green energy, renewable sources, right? So you can't blame a system-wide failure on a source of power that is 1/10 of what you're getting it from. It doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, and the thing about like the regulations that do require winterization, right? These are the kind of things that regulations that exist because if you just say, hey, companies, do whatever you want, right? And as long as because it's all part of the free market, right? They're going to go chasing after what makes them the most money. And what makes the most money, right? It's not preparing for the winter storm that we see last week, because those storms, we can't say that happens all the time, right? It's not like it happens every year. So why plan for it, right? So they don't plan for it, and because they don't want to invest the money into planning for it. And then when something like this comes along, we see this catastrophic failure, right? Now, if we really just go down this whole deregulation route, the question is going to be, you've seen the worst of what can happen, or at least so far. We've seen how bad things can get. At this point, is there a financial incentive to do the preparation to ensure that the system, the grid, can handle this kind of temperature extreme, right? If that financial incentive isn't there and they aren't going to do it anyway, well, guess what? They won't, right? And we can't be surprised that these kind of emergencies or disasters happen. And then you see the kind of massive statewide destruction that we saw last week. That's why regulations exist, though, because the regulations can set the minimum and say, hey, regardless of your financial incentive, you meet this requirement to ensure that you're prepared, right? It forces companies to do these kind of decisions that they wouldn't otherwise because their goal for any company is profit.
Exactly. And I'm going to add on to that too. One issue that you learn in economics is the common pool problem. Now, for energy companies, you're right. They don't have any incentive to winterize. They have no incentive to prepare for these situations, because guess what? When these situations arise, okay, so they run out of power for 1 week, 2 weeks. They're not generating revenue. That's 2 weeks out of 10 years. Who bears that damage, right? It's private citizens, poor people, rich people, people whose houses have been damaged, people whose families have been torn apart because of whatever situation they were in. State government, federal government, FEMA, everyone who has to come in to pay, to prepare aid, to really come in and step in and help these people, insurance companies that now have to bear the brunt of a lot of these damages. Again, the energy companies, they have no financial incentive. This is a common pool problem. This is a cost that they cannot that they can externalize, and it's a risk for everybody, but they don't have to bear that risk. They're letting society, insurance companies, the government, and individuals bear that risk for them. So when you talk about deregulation, when you talk about individual responsibility, there's a huge disconnect there, because energy companies aren't bearing the risk that they are basically taking on.
Yeah, it's like we'll tack on something real quick here, right? And also, I'm gonna give a quick shout out to my cousin Callie, who's watching, dropping all these comments here. So I think we actually do have something to compare it to, right? I live in San Jose and in California, and last year we saw wildfires that are like nothing we've never seen, right? And these kind of wildfires, the phenomenon, as large as they exist and that we have been able to see and experience, began I want to say 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I think, and it was because of a spark, a failure in part of PG&E's grid that led to just kind of massive like wildfire damage. Right now, now PG&E has been able to operate for a long time and minimize these kind of issues, right? But even in California, right, we have an infrastructure system where it is the equipment, the poles, a lot of this stuff, they're getting on to be about 75, 80, like, you know, some of these lines here, like 100 years old, right? And we need to be able to upgrade that too, right? Now, I want to be very clear about saying this, right? Like, that, you know, when we say a company is free to go and do whatever they want and they're going to go chasing after profit, we can't be surprised when these extremes aren't prepared for, right? But it also requires kind of this consistent oversight. Now, because California, we do operate under a very regulated energy system, and these requirements are there. Part of the issue becomes we have to make sure that the ability of these regulated industries, these regulated companies, that they have the ability to upgrade and update their infrastructure over time as well, right? This became one of those things where if you keep pushing off those, you know, maintenance projects, you keep pushing off the capital improvement projects, you keep pushing off the things that ensure the infrastructure stays safe and stays on top of the needs, right? It's a problem, right? And it can create dramatic, painful results, right? In California, wildfires, right? Now, I'm sorry, let me correct that. It's not the infrastructure that created the wildfires, right? It was our inability to be prepared for them, right? And so these wildfires, and not all of them are connected to the PG&E, good infrastructure. But when these wildfires come through, they hurt. So that's where we start learning and we prepare for it. And government regulation helps ensure that the private entities, that the companies that are involved in some way in this work do meet those requirements.
I agree with you, Hui. I also think coming back to our main question about blaming renewable energy as the cause for the faulty electrical grid, I just want to come back and talk about what happens when we do put these blame on the renewable energy instead of putting the blame on the actual people that cause the failures in electrical grid, as well as millions, actually a lot of people having their house being flooded, no electricity, and all of that. And I just wanted to bring up this fun picture from our National Space Station with really old solar panels that are still withstanding, outer space, which is very, very cold. And that being said, if the solar panels can still work after all this time, I still think that Texas needs to build up on all of these renewable energy instead of blaming it, because what you're doing right now, instead of winterizing your electrical grid, winterizing all these new renewable energies, you're shifting the blame onto something that's non-existent. And that is why we need better leadership for Texas per se, so that they can elect people that care about the state and help push more initiatives so that issues like these won't happen again. But I will go ahead and go to the next point, where what has the government done so far compared to our Texas government, which is a good segue to talk about what our beautiful, beautiful people in the government, for example, Ted Cruz, Greg Abbott, and even our one of the running person for office, Beto O'Rourke, what have they done in comparison to what Texas government has done? I'll let Hui go first this time. Or actually, yeah, I'll let Hui go first this time.
Sure. Let me tell you right off the bat, when things go wrong, the first thing you're going to see people do is point fingers, right? And that's literally what happened here, right? You had people suffering. You had people whose homes were experiencing extreme damage. You had people just scrambling to find a way to stay warm and keep their families safe. And of course, people are going to be angry. I mean, I would be. If I had my roof falling in because my pipes burst, if I had no way to make sure that my family and friends were safe, if I had no way to let people know that I was okay, I would be very angry and upset, right? So you've got people in the government who are, they start pointing fingers. Abbott did the most ridiculous thing by blaming, the Green New Deal and renewable energy, when that is such an insignificant part of the Texas energy sources, right? It's like blaming a car accident on blaming a car accident on somebody who's waiting on the bus. Why? Because I was staring at the person waiting on the bus or something, right? It's like no sense. It makes no sense. Now, the responsibility of the Texas government, though, is to take care of its people, and they're going to have to go and do that, right? And what you see people like Beto O'Rourke doing, what we see people like AOC doing, is they're trying to fill in those gaps, right? They're trying to do that by getting donations, by directing resources into the state, and that's what President Joe Biden is doing as well, right? The federal government can provide support and bring in resources to help the state address kind of overcome this. And I hope that the people in Texas can hang through these tough times as all of this help comes in, right? But Texas is still going to be the one running its recovery here. They have to be, right, because they are their own independent state government, and they have jurisdiction, they have control. So a lot of other folks, what they are doing, they're coming in and they're trying to play a support role, because when you see people suffering, you don't sit back and point and laugh. You get off your butt and you go and help.
Absolutely. And now I would like to point out that immediately, I believe it was Monday or Tuesday last week, as soon as Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, asked Joe Biden to declare a state of emergency in Texas, Joe Biden did not hesitate. He did that right away, and what that allowed the federal government to do was to send FEMA, or it allowed FEMA to come in and provided aid. It provided generators, it provided food, additional resources to help people on the ground there. Now, Biden did take a step further, and he approved a major disaster declaration in Texas, which then allows additional funding to come in. Now, a typical state of emergency declaration for FEMA that only brings in that is capped at $5 million. Joe Biden approving a major disaster declaration will allow additional funding to come in. The budget for FEMA is about $50 billion for this year, I believe. And so we don't know how much of that FEMA will have to decide how much of that will go into aiding Texas. Of course, they have to prepare for the whole year. You're talking about hurricanes that are going to come hit Florida and the Southeast during the summer, snowstorms in the Northeast. So a lot for FEMA to prepare there. And then we may have to consider additional aid packages that will have to go through Congress. And of course, that is big government spending. Texas loves to decry big government spending. So I don't know if they want to welcome that kind of aid package coming from the federal government. But history has shown us that Republican states tend to love receiving aid packages from the federal government every time they have a disaster. They just hate it when blue states get those same aid packages, right?
Did you see that too? Did you hear about Tim Boyd, mayor of Colorado City?
Oh yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like as you say that, it's kind of like interesting, because that's like a prime example of this in a sense, right? Tim Boyd, for those who don't know, he's the mayor of Colorado City, or was the mayor of Colorado City until he resigned.
Can we specify that Colorado City is in Texas, not Colorado, because that confuses people.
Colorado City, Texas. There you go. But it was interesting. If you see the message he put out last week, he said, his response to this entire situation, people struggling, failing infrastructure, right? People being kicked out of their homes or forced out of their homes because they didn't have any power to stay warm and survive, was, hey, stop looking for a handout. You figure it out, right? So, I mean, this is the kind of philosophy that I think is incredibly dangerous and kind of shows, that if we go down this route of just, hey, everybody takes care of themselves, though, and if you don't make it, hey, good to know you kind of thing, right? What we're saying is, what that kind of viewpoint says is we shouldn't be helping the people of Texas at all, right? The people of Texas weren't prepared for a cold winter storm, so therefore they should suffer. And if some of them happen to die, well, so be it. And, that's what's it called? Darwinism, right?
Yes.
But I mean, and there's a reason why he resigned, though, right? If you believe your job in government is to let people die, then I don't think you should have a job in government.
It's so ironic to hear when people says, oh, if you really want it, you have to work hard for it, because they're also the first people that are in line to get free things. For example, COVID vaccine, when everyone is waiting their turn to even get a chance in line, they're the first to get the vaccine. And we see it, how hypocritical they are, because they're hoarding all these type of resources and then tell people that they should work hard in order to get the type of resources. And I think that is that's a whole other issue. But I will go ahead and share something funny that I found on the internet about Ted Cruz saying that he will believe climate change when Texas freezes over. Well, the time is now, and I hope the time is. This means that he would do something about this issue. But another thing I wanted to bring up is the famous circulating Ted Cruz going to Mexico with his family issue. So it turns out that he does believe that, you can cross borders in order to make sure your family is in a safe place. Um, but he has since came back to do some work for the government, and I guess we will see what he has to offer. um, does anyone? Sorry, I'll continue with the next section, which is how has the capitalism, in this case, ERCOT and the isolated electrical grid of Texas, destroyed people's lives in this Texas crisis?
So we have covered that quite a bit today. I'm just going to take a quick brief at some of my notes. We are looking at business disruptions, broken pipes that are going to need fixing, flooding in people's homes, spiking electric bills. We've seen anecdotal stories of people reporting $10,000, $12,000, $17,000 electric bills when in fact they have not had power all week, or they've barely had any power. On an anecdotal level, a friend of mine, she got a bill saying that she had used, I believe, about 1,000 kilowatts of power when, again, she has not had power all week. So it's just that kind of bill just didn't make any sense to her. And we see people's lives being disrupted. People are being forced out of their homes. People are losing power. They're losing water. And for those things to be fixed, for example, the picture that you just showed us earlier, and other pictures that we've seen online all week, those damages, they're not things that are going to be fixed as soon as power or water comes back on. Those are damages that are going to take weeks and months to fix, so that it creates so that people can return to their homes and resume their livelihoods. And because of how widespread this damage is, I gotta imagine getting the plumbers, getting the right people into your home, that's going to be a whole another challenge in and of itself. And Hui, did you want to add to that?
I mean, well, if I could just make one earlier point about something that was brought up earlier, right? Like making fun of Ted Cruz is just too easy, right? Like, that tweet, this is a serious situation, and it's not like, we shouldn't kind of be enjoying it that much, right? I mean, we shouldn't be. But when you got a guy like Ted Cruz, who is a firebrand, who tries to make points about deregulation and whatnot, and then you have a literal tweet with his exact words, and it is just so fitting for what is going on. I mean, just the irony should not be lost here, right? Well, the irony should not be lost at all. That I think Texas literally froze over last week, and what are you going to do about it, right? And here's the thing about when we talk about capitalism. I mean, when we talk about energy, I think for me the term I'm used to is just deregulation, right? Because the thing is, we live in a capitalist economy, right? And while there are going to be some regulatory changes, we're talking about something pretty drastic. If that is, we're talking about fundamentally, changing the capitalist nature of our economy. But I think for me, what we're really talking about is regulation, right? I mean, power. There are certain industries, there are certain resources that are considered so fundamental to the well-being of our society, of our nation, of our communities, right? That there has to be oversight, that there has to be regulation. In power, energy, I mean, that is absolutely a critical field, right? I mean, if we don't have power, you can't work, you can't learn, Well, you can't learn in classrooms, right? You can't like it's how do you communicate, right? We rely on energy to get us through so many aspects of our day, our job, and staying in touch with people, doing the things that we take for granted every single day. That if we just let folks kind of run and do whatever they're going to want with our power sources, I mean, what's to stop the gouging from kicking in? I mean, you were just talking about a person who got a bill for 1,000 megawatts of energy use, right? I mean, even if assuming a person actually uses that much, right? Should they be paying out an arm and a leg? Should they be giving up their life savings for doing that in the middle of a freeze and people are trying to stay warm so they don't lose limbs, right? So they can protect themselves, right? And we're also seeing how this plays out in other ways too. I mean, when there's an emergency right now and you can't stay in your home because you don't have power, some people, you know what they do? They go to a hotel. Why not? Let me just throw on some money. I'm going to find a nice place to stay for the night. I don't have to clean up after myself. I'm going to take care of myself and my family. We'll enjoy a nice facility for the night. So what now? If I own a hotel, what do? Oh, all these people are desperate. They don't have options, and they're looking for a place where they can stay and stay warm for the night. I got rooms, and you got nowhere else to go. So let me jack up my prices to crazy to a number I would not charge otherwise. I would never charge $450 a night to stay at an extended stay motel, right? But hey, you need me now, so I might as well do it, right? That's gouging, right? And this is the other kind of regulation we need over the market. When you've got crazy important, crazy natural disasters happening, when you've got things going on where people need resources. I mean, look, everybody's entitled to some profit, but if you're going to go out there and you're going to take massive advantage of the situation, and you're literally putting people in a life or death situation, then it's gouging, it's extortion, right? And you're forcing people to pay to stay alive. And that's the kind of thing we need to stop in our regulations.
Yeah, I agree with you, Hui. And for everyone that's watching, if you guys have noticed any price gouging, please report it to this website, which is readyharris.org, or text 346 354 7459. And just know that violators can be faced fines all the way up to $250,000, and it's being organized by county attorney at CD Minafree. I will post this in the comment as well. But going back to what you guys were saying, I would also add that there has been a lot of death, unnecessary death really, regarding this crisis. Like, for example, because people are so cold in their own home, they have to turn on the heat somehow. And a lot of people end up dying, or I guess suffocating, from carbon monoxide poisoning in their home because they couldn't turn on this heat, so they had to use it from their own car. As well as a lot of homeless people who doesn't have a home are dying on the street. People are losing their toes, their fingers through frostbites, something that can be fixed, could have been fixed by the government if we were prepared for it, but we were not prepared for it. And that is really due to back what you were saying, Hui, about capitalism and the need to be able to profitize everything. And capitalism doesn't always mean efficiency. Capitalism also just means you charge people whatever you need to in order to make a profit. And I think that is what's so dangerous about putting something like capitalism onto the necessity that we need. With that being said, we need power, we need internet, Wi-Fi, we need access to information, we need healthcare, medical care. And especially in times like these, if you were hit with a freezing pipeline and your water bursts, that's so much costs that it will have to go, all your savings literally being drained from having to fix the house, having to make sure that all your health is okay. I don't know if there's accidents that happen. And all of these things, it's so unnecessary. I feel like, in a sense, it's trying to keep in crises like these, and you see these accidents happen, it feels like you're just making the lower class lower instead of helping us, trying to achieve this quote unquote American dream.
It's successful.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm just gonna chime in here. There are different, philosophies of how we approach capitalism, right? There are people whom I believe, he would. It sounds like he's on this train, where we can approach capitalism in a way where, yes, we want government, companies, private individuals, corporations to go after profits, to try to create value for their shareholders. But we also believe in a government that comes in, regulates them, so that way we prevent issues like this from happening, and also we create a more equitable or equal society. And there's a way, there are different approaches, different philosophies of how we can reform, we can address capitalism, and create more regulations, and create, change the way corporations and business individuals look at their role in society. So all of these things can be fixed within capitalism. Some people don't really believe that. Some people, of course, go the other direction, and they want unfettered, wild west capitalism. But there is a road there for us to take, and we've seen some prominent politicians, including Elizabeth Warren, and in the same degree, even Bernie Sanders believes in reforming capitalism versus just throwing it aside and going another route. So what we should advocate for, I would say, is, again, he is very focused on discussing deregulation and unfettered capitalism. We want to advocate for more regulations and more control and more policies to address the inequalities of our current system.
Hey, you know what? I feel like a lot of these conversations, they're like, these are the same conversations that have been had before, but they use, but we use different terms, right? I mean, the address around the focusing this issue around like regulation, and especially around energy. I mean, this happened this conversation has been going since the 80s, right? People have talked about, hey, do we have private companies control the grid, produce the energy and do the infrastructure to put it out there, right? Or do we regulate it? We put in the oversight to make sure that the providers are doing what they need to do to keep us safe and also keep the power flowing, right? So, for me, it's the word itself is less important than the meaning, right? Than the ideas that's being conveyed, right? And I will tell you that right now, what we're seeing in Texas is a big example of why like an unfettered free market is not what we want, not that desirable for situations like what we're seeing, right? We need to be ready for the worst situations and the worst conditions. And you don't make money preparing for the worst. I mean, why do you think insurance doesn't cover everything, right? Insurance is there so you can pay a monthly nut and it covers, most of the things you deal with, and they'll make money that way, right? But in the most extreme situations, right, many insurance policies don't cover that. That's why we had to kind of do things like, make sure that insurance companies don't keep people out who had pre-existing conditions, right? That's why we had to, regulate, not just energy, but we regulate agriculture, right? We do a lot. There's a lot of regulations there to make sure that the most worst situations that we can end up in are prepared for, and that we have the ability to survive those moments, to get past those moments, right? If we just simply say, hey, you know what, the person with the most money gets whatever they want, well, then the people who are going to get through it are always the people with the money.
That's true. Yeah.
The problem is that, when you create that kind of system, what happens is that people in the middle, when those situations arise, they get kicked down another notch. And the people at the bottom, of course, stay at the bottom, or they get kicked further down. And so I think, after a few generations, what do you have? You have a very limited amount of people at the top and so many at the bottom. And we've seen that in history time and time again. If you create that kind of system, of only a select few will end up at the top. Everyone else will just be down there. And makes for a lot of great novels for a post-apocalyptic world, I would say. Great novels and great TV shows, right?
Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah. Well, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just going to say, like, another thing I wanted to add is now that, climate change is happening. So this is not the first time we're going to see a crisis happening regarding how prepared and how well regulated different companies around the U.S. are. So this is happening in Texas for now, but next maybe in a month it could be California. In another month it could be New York, anywhere around the world. And we have to make sure that our governors, our representatives are all prepared for these kind of situations, because the more climate change happen, the more the ocean's going to rise, the more different drastic change in the weather will cause a lot of unprecedented weather conditions that are just not normally common. And that's why more and more recently we've seen a lot of like once in a lifetime event, once in a lifetime of snow, once in a lifetime of all these other natural disasters. And it shouldn't be a once in a lifetime. We should have just focused on helping saving our planet, switch to more renewable energy resources, as well as winterize and regulate the companies that keep tracks and produce these type of energy resources, as well as help the middle and the lower class to be able to withstand for themselves during the I guess the issues that comes up. So this way, I obviously it's very hopeful, it's very utopian-y, but I really hope that the people at the top have the sense, not just every 4 years to say I support you as people, but as like a sense of morality about issues like these, and make sure they actually help the people that voted for them. But yeah.
Definitely. One of the, and I think one of the things to keep in mind, right, and this came to mind as you were mentioning this, right, these events that appear to be once in a lifetime, it's not anymore, right? The wildfire that was sparked by a PG&E like transponder kind of blowing up, I mean, now they happen sporadically, right? They happen because of lightning and thunder, or the lightning, excuse me, right? These winter storms, right? It seems like it's a once in a lifetime thing, but that's the thing about climate change, right? The things that we haven't seen happen before, it's starting to happen a lot more. I mean, I think the joke about 2020 is that it just never seems like it's ending, right? But I mean, we saw so many natural disasters happening in 2020 that it's a little mind-boggling, and it should really raise a lot of alarms and a lot of red flags here that we need to be much more serious about that. I mean, one of the craziest things I remember was that Greenland was literally on fire. I don't know if you guys remember that, right? It was that the ice had melted so much that a lot of the gases that had been trapped and under the ice, under the ice for a while, when it became released, once it caught fire, it just kept on going, right? So these are the kind of things that we have to be prepared for, and I think that's part of Texas is just an example of that, right? We have we got to be prepared more for these disasters, and we also got to get a lot more serious about addressing climate change. I support the Green New Deal. I think it's critically important that we set these goals for ourselves, and we need to move in that direction.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. Back in the 90s, there was a hurricane called Hurricane Andrew, I believe, that hit the U.S. in 1995. Now, Hurricane Andrew was a Category 5 hurricane. It was so significant that we had one Category 5 hurricane hit us that went into the history books, and we learned it in history class. Now we see at least three Category 5 hurricanes a year, all hitting Florida. I believe in 2017, 3 hurricanes hit Florida within a span of about 1 month. They were all Category 4 or 5. I believe they were all in Category 5. Just a lot of damage. And you look at what happened in Houston a few years ago. Again, another hurricane there. Katrina, of course, back about 16 years ago. Those events were supposed to be once in a lifetime, as we discussed. They're just happening left and right now, and we don't even bat an eyelash anymore. So we do need to address climate change. I believe we've kind of crossed the critical point right now. So we have to, if we had better plans 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have to take as drastic measures. But we're at the point where we do have to take these drastic measures. But we can take these drastic measures. Look at what China's been doing. We should be the leader. The U.S. should be the leader in climate and in green energy, and we can create a lot of jobs. It's not a zero-sum game between the economy and climate change. We can do so much, and we have the technology, and we're just waiting for it to be kickstart. We should do it.
Yeah, one of the good thing is that Biden recently rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, and I think that it's a great step towards finally rebuilding our Earth. Hopefully, with the upcoming his administration will fund a lot more energy related projects for scientists so that they can find new type of renewable energies as well as work on these nuclear energy that does not hurt our environment in any way and increase carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. But even then, we really, really have to push this regarding because climate change is happening. And I believe there was an estimate that in about 5 to 10 years, by that point, it might be too late to come back. And I know we recently landed a rover on Mars, but the chances of all of us moving to Mars, especially lower and middle class income people, that's not likely. So it's really good to focus on the planet that we have now. But going back to these natural disasters, I think the people that are going to hit the most are most likely going to be the people the middle and lower class. And I know I kind of talk about this, but I want to talk about the Senate, like the increase in sea level. There's going to be a lot more flooding, a lot more people moving out of, for example, Louisiana, which can be easily flooded if not taking the proper precautions. And it has happened in the past with Hurricane Katrina, I believe. Yes, Hurricane Katrina, and it literally moved a lot of people out of that area where they call home, and we're going to see it happens a lot more if people don't start turning back. And I'm 100% sure we're going to have our next crisis maybe in a month, maybe in 2 months, even in this year. And it's not going to hurt the higher class in any way. They have money, they can buy bunkers, they can send themselves to Mars if they really want to. But going back to this, how can we, middle and lower class, prepare ourselves for future crisis, and what can we do in order to be more prepared for situation like this?
I'm just gonna add though that the upper class is going to be hurt too. Okay, their condos in Miami and their private islands in the Caribbean and their private little cabos are all going to be gone. And just to add on to what you said, I saw a documentary recently about the Marshall Islands, and people there are now looking for ways to basically leave their home, leave their ancestral homes, to come to the U.S. or to other parts, well, to the U.S. because they see the damage every year. They see the floods coming in. They see the water coming in. They know it's no longer viable for them to live in the Marshall Islands or a lot of these other Pacific islands. And for someone, we look at our culture and for our people to leave our homeland, but we know that it was always there for Vietnamese people. It was, the emotional damage, the trauma, everything that came along with like leaving one's homeland and coming to the US. Now, just imagine these people leaving and knowing that their homeland might not be there in 20, 30, 40 years from now. That's just very heartbreaking. And I'm sorry, An, what was the second part of your question?
I forgot, but Took from the comments did bring up a really important point. But usually people in the South, as well as heavily Republican states, do not believe in climate change. How would we be able to change their mind?
Well, I think this is one of the things. I mean, does tie in actually to the question you asked before on about what we can do to prepare for this, right? I mean, look, I think the very first thing that we need to do, and a lot of people have been doing, is that we have to accept that climate change is real, right? We have to accept at a very fundamental level that our own activities, our own conduct is contributing to a change in the temperatures, in the planet's kind of core temperature here, and average temperatures. And that actually does impact the weather. It impacts, sea levels. It impacts everybody, who lives along the coast. It impacts the people who don't live along the coast because, wouldn't the weirdest thing be that, the places that were normally a desert now become like weird lush gardens, right? I mean, it sounds great in theory, but you got to imagine the kind of damage and impact changing an entire ecosystem can have, right? So I think from there, like we've got to get people to believe in this fundamental idea that climate change is real and we have to be more responsible for the planet. And I think, we can do that in part by reacting to these kind of conditions, to these events like this freeze, in the way that many people we've seen, right? For example, we've seen people donate and give, and they want to help out people in Texas, right? And part of the reason why this is so effective is because when you see people struggling and you see people suffering and you see people coming together to help each other, right? It's a way to kind of create an impact using a positive influence, right? Hey, look, we come out to help you because this is something you've struggled through. We will help you get through this. And then the next conversation that we're going to have is how we make sure that this doesn't happen again. Or the next conversation we're going to have is how we can be better prepared for something like this in the future, right? When we come together to support each other, right, I think it creates it pulls at the heartstrings and makes people pay attention. So, hey, strongly encourage everyone to help the people in Texas. I mean, I want to do the best I can. My brother lives in Dallas. My cousin Callie lives out in Texas, right? So I got people out in Texas too. I got some friends out in Texas too. So, I mean, that's one, and the other thing too, besides addressing climate change is, I think the other part of addressing climate change is really getting us to use the technology, use the kind of resources that do have less of a carbon imprint, right? For example, hey, I have my reusable straw, right? It's a small thing, right? But you get a reusable straw, less resources used to produce massive amounts of plastic straws, less resources we have to do to just kind of clean it all up, to store it, to transport it, to do whatever, right? And it's a small thing, right? But hey, if all of us do it, it counts as one, right? Hey, let's start switching over to renewable sources of fuel for transportation, or use more public transportation, right? The number one contributor to climate change is cars, right? Hey, so let me hop on the bus, right? And for me and my girlfriend, we actually share a car, right? We don't each have our own car right now. We share a car. We don't drive that much anyway because of COVID, but we share, right? We got to find those little ways to encourage people to take ownership of this process too.
Yeah, and then the fun part is that, being Vietnamese, Vietnamese, we are very thrifty when it comes to our plastic bags. So I'm pretty sure you guys can always reuse your plastic bags. It's probably found in your sink somewhere. I know I have one for me too. But other than that, I wanted to bring up that a lot of people actually in the world are working towards more renewable sources as well. I know they had this news in the past where a Vietnamese person uses a straw from this like leaf thing in Vietnam, and it was really popular because it's obviously is biodegradable and it doesn't harm the environment anyway, and you're using what the environment gives you, which lowers emission of any cost to make the plastic, as well as there's also a company that produces that makes plastics now into bricks to build houses. And I think those are very innovative way in order to reduce our carbon footprint and help the earth become a little bit cleaner, a little bit better for everybody. But another thing that I wanted to add is that this time, especially for those young voices that are Vietnamese American community as well as any other Asian American communities, you use your voice to vote in the people that actually care for you. Because this crisis, what it does, it brings out, it tells you by action who actually cares for you, who you should vote. Because looking at Beto O'Rourke and what he did for the community, while also not being elected as the not being elected, he still contributed to the community. He still helped the people, and I think it speaks so well to his character that he is not, in a sense, wavered by any major corruption. He's caring about the people, and he does his best. And his hometown, which is El Paso, is not even part of the ERCO electrical grid. So he literally had no incentives, but he did it because of the caring of his heart. And so for the people that haven't voted before, or you're learning more and more about politics as well as the different policy, it's so important to get your parents up to speed about what is actually going on, what the climate change is, what that means, what that entails to what they're seeing right now in the news, in the nature, and then vote in the politicians that you truly believe in. Make your voice heard. Do phone banking, get more involved in the government, because the only way this is going to work if there is enough people with really, really loud voices to overcome any naysayers, any people that really just again push the blame on something else instead of actually solving the problem. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Agreed.
The last part, we're nearing the end of our live stream. So the last part I wanted to ask for us is, what can you do? You know, our live stream, our audience, to help the people that are currently suffering in this crisis. Sorry, go ahead.
Was that for the audience? Wasn't sure there.
For the audience, but you know what I can do? I think someone is working, but there are a lot of different ways you can do to be able to help the people that are currently in Texas. For example, you can donate some money into the Salvation Army, the American Red Cross, which now currently is provide food, shelters, and other necessary items. I know that the snowstorm is kind of over, but there are still a lot of people that need a lot of financial help in order to fix their homes, to make sure that they're going back on track. Their current living condition coming back on track. And for the people that are living in Texas right now, and you see a huge price surge in your electrical bill, stop your auto payment for your bill. This is an advice that I saw, but stop your auto payment and then call the electric company and see if you can discuss for a more flexible rate. That way you can decrease your electric bill, because I know there's a lot of surges that are going on in Texas, and it's important to make sure that you can get the best deal for you and your family right now, considering all the things that are happening. There are also, I think it's just going to be me talking. Sorry, guys. There is also a hashtag Love Thy Neighbor campaign to raise money for hotels room, food, water, and clothing in Austin, Texas, as well as Mercy Chef, which provides hot meal, clean drinking water, and and then grocery boxes for people in the Dallas Fort Worth area. The Houston Food Bank is also distributing food for people that are in need. And there are also a lot of small businesses that if you just check their Instagram, they have some incentives that help you to be able to overcome these type of disasters. Overall, there are, one more thing I wanted to note is the Austin Pets Alive are working to keep pets warm, especially pets that are outside right now. So please, any donations will help, and make sure that I know Texas is experiencing a hard time, and sometimes California or other parts of the parts of the U.S. also experience hard time, and it's important this time to come together and then, first of all, fix the problem, and then second, find a way so that this doesn't happen again. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm just gonna add, if someone's looking for a place to donate, personally, I think AOC is the best place to go. She, of course, is the congresswoman from New York, funny enough, and of course, a target of a Republican right-wing attacks. Anyhow, she's someone you can trust. She's the money, 100% of the donations will go to organizations that will be boots on the ground. Her team and her team has done the research, has done the vetting to make sure that the organizations are on the ground and doing the work there. Because of course, in situations like this, there are so many sources, so many organizations that are going to be available. And just sorting through, being able to pick out the right ones is going to be tough. If you want to trust someone, AOC is a great place to go and just donate your money, and then she'll redistribute the funds that way.
Yeah. And then shout out as well to HEB, which when they lost power, they told Texans to just go ahead without paying. That's very kind, and it's very helpful to a lot of people in need. And I think, in times like this, you do see some silver lining. You see a community coming together to help people in need. And I truly think that that's where humanity really lies.
And while I agree with that, I think that it shouldn't be their responsibility. And at the end of the day, we should hold the government accountable to take care of people, so that they don't have to rely on the kind-heartedness of businessmen and women.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Yep.
Hugh, did you have anything to add?
No, hey, you know what? Definitely sending a lot of love and thoughts to the people of Texas. I definitely kept tabs because my own family and friends are there. So if there are any, I think if there's a mutual aid network that people can share or they want to talk about, we definitely should make sure we boost that, and definitely hoping that everyone recovers well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you everyone for joining Komnai Kombia today on the live stream. I hope we had a lot of really good discussion about, first of all, capitalism, and second, the snow crisis. So we will see you guys hopefully next week to discuss more. But thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you everyone for participating. Have a good Sunday.
Bye.
Bye.